Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the SUMP training program Module 5 webinar about engaging stakeholders in planning mobility measures and in sustainable urban mobility planning. My name is Sibelius, and I'm your host today. I represent the Union of the Baltic Cities Sustainable Cities Commission, hosted by the city of Turku, and we are the lead partner in the SUMPs for PSR project that is behind organizing this training program. And this project has been supported by the Indirect Baltic Sea Region program. In the SUMPs for PSR project, we are supporting the small and mid-sized cities to develop and apply sustainable urban mobility planning. And within this topic, we have been focusing on active mobility, on data collection on cycling and walking, and monitoring and evaluation for the SUMP. And you can read more about our project on the project webpage. In this SUMP training program, we have 5 modules, and we are down to the last webinar. We have one more workshop coming up on the same topic, so stakeholder and citizen engagement on 27th of May. And we're constantly updating all the training materials, including recordings on the Baltic Sea Region SUMP Competence Center website that you can see the address and the QR code link to. So you're most welcome to check out the previous trainings on there. And I'd like to say a few words and invite you all to the final conference of 2 Interact Baltic Sea Region projects, SUMPs for PSR and BATS. It will be organized on 8th and 9th of September in Gdynia in Poland, and we will, of course, discuss the future of active mobility and sustainable urban mobility planning, hear very practical experiences from our 11 partner cities and also other cities. And you have also a chance to network with like-minded professionals. So we have just published the full program, and the registration has been opened, so you can see the website address there to check out more information and register to our final conference. So we hope to see many of you in Gdynia in September. You're very welcome. And then a few words about our today's agenda. But first, this module, it introduces some practical strategies for involving stakeholders throughout the SUMP process and in planning mobility measures, guiding participants through stakeholder mapping, designing engagement frameworks, and choosing effective techniques to build awareness, secure political support, and strengthen collaboration. We will begin soon with a presentation from on the key elements of successful stakeholder and citizen engagement from our key training expert, Dr. Kristina Gaučė. And then we will hear 2 interesting cases from city of Leuven in Belgium and Vilnius in Lithuania. And also we will dive deeper with Kristina on into selecting effective engagement activities. And before we begin with the agenda, please note that the webinar is being recorded, and throughout the webinar, we encourage you to pose your questions via the Q&A box you can see in the Zoom panel. And together with my colleague Adham Maharamli, we are taking care of the technical part, so in case there are any issues, we will be there to support. And now it's time to begin with our first presentation about key elements of successful stakeholder and citizen engagement. And this will be given by Dr. Kristina Gaučė, who is an expert in sustainable urban mobility with over 20 years of experience on the topic. And recently she has been the key trainer in the EIB Jaspers training program. And also she has been our key training expert in the modules 1, 2, and now the 5th module as well. So I will give the word to you, Kristina.
So good morning once again, and I'm very excited for 2 reasons. One reason, excited to be here, but the other reason, sweet and bitter, that the training program is coming to the end, and I was very happy and lucky to be part of that. And today we have a very interesting topic, and I think it's a very often underestimated topic. And practitioners, we often take support from citizens or different stakeholders as granted, which is not the case. So what we will try to do with exciting examples from Leuven and Vilnius, but also to go from some other cases from other places in Europe or outside Europe, just to give you some tips and maybe some framework or just inspirations how to build successful engagement plan or advocacy plan, whatever you call it. Otherwise, you can do it randomly, but knowing why you do that, what do you want to achieve, and what are your, I don't know, facilities and tools which would help you to do that, would make this process easy, smooth, and most likely successful. So first thing, we have a slide on SUMP, what it makes successful, right? But I think all the ideas I would be presenting or my colleagues would be presenting today, they are totally relevant despite the scope and topic of the project. Engagement is always crucial. But then depending on the size of your project, and is it pilot, is it overall city strategy, is it master plan, or is it sustainable urban mobility plan, based on the topic and the scope, of course, and local context, you can choose the most prosperous and the most rightful tools and activities to be held. But so this slide is just to remind that the big competence and the good technical excellence is not enough to create and validate your good ideas within SUMP. Especially it applies when SUMP is commissioned to external consultant and is not entirely held by the city. So having enough capacities to gain public support, but before that you need to engage with them, and to gain political support. But again, you need to find a way how to make them interested in your project, are similarly crucial elements of successful plan. So there are different examples how, when, with whom it could be done. And on the screen, you will see examples from, for example, Budapest, where we did this engagement very much in the beginning of SUMP, but then we held only, how to say, post consultations after SUMP was drafted. So that's one of the type of strategies to take on. There are some other examples from Germany where we would be carrying in each phase of SUMP or another project, we would be carrying different type of activities, sometimes with citizens, sometimes with stakeholders, sometimes with both. So depending on what you really want to achieve with this engagement process, you can choose activities and timing when to do that. So basically, when it comes to building strategy for engagement and this communication action plan, there are 4 crucial questions to be answered. Why to do that? Whom to engage and involve with, when to do, at what stages of the project, and then the last question, how to do that. And basically, to the question how, we would be answering in my second presentation today, going through different examples of different cities and in different situations. But the questions why, who, and when, I will try to provide answer right now. So first thing is why to engage. I believe in the countries where you have those national guidelines on SUMP or guidelines how to prepare strategies and master plans, it's already, there is 1 or 2 chapters on obligation to engage, right? But I saw quite many examples when cities followed only this mandatory approach, and they really did this public consultations after plan was prepared. So that makes people not trust the process, but also stakeholders are not interested because we are already being given hot potato. So it's very important from very beginning to understand how useful are citizens in the process, because especially sustainable urban mobility plan is citizen-centered project, right? Everything you are doing is not somehow to force people to start traveling differently or to convince them to do it differently. Basically, you do a sustainable urban mobility plan to understand the demand, the actual needs, the problems, the challenges we are facing, and to try to address those in the way that mobility in the city becomes more and more sustainable. For this, you need to understand needs from different target groups. Not to forget that residents sometimes can come up with very, very good fresh ideas. And I think Beatričė would be speaking about that later today from Vilnius Citizen Assembly example. So citizens are crucial, especially in the first phase of SUMP, when you start preparing your, I don't know, planning boundaries, preparing your topics you would like to address, thinking about data collection plan. That's very, very good time to engage with citizens. And if you do it successfully, first of all, you gain their trust, and step by step, you gain also understanding on why it was being done, because at some point you would come up with not very popular measures maybe to be applied, like demand management, some restrictions to access, timing, and so on. But this engagement also creates shared responsibility. And I faced many times this good example of, I would say, successful campaign, which we carried throughout the process in Vilnius. And it's already, I don't know, 7-8 years when the plan was approved in different formats, in different events. I hear people saying, remember when we were preparing SUMP? So it's not me or my team who prepared, but we together with citizens, we did that. So we end up with shared responsibility as well. While with stakeholders is approaches also will be different, but also goals engaging with stakeholders are a little bit different if to compare the goals to why to engage with citizens. And first of all, you yourself as public administration, you have different interests to different stakeholders. Somebody may share with you data, somebody may provide you funding, somebody has projects you want to harmonize, somebody has projects or carrying projects with totally different idea, so you need to coordinate. So there are different interests from your side, but also from stakeholders. Basically, if stakeholders are interested in your plan, quite often we are all lobbying some particular idea, for example, metro. We will see some examples also in my presentation, or we have very little particular interest, only on active modes, but then we do not care on anything else, or we just have power to provide funds, and we are not that much interested in your particular project because we are no regional or national agency. So there are different interests going from your side and stakeholders side, which creates already some potential areas, not only for collaboration, but also for conflict. So this is why it's very important, again, to engage as early as possible and as effectively as possible with the core stakeholders to gain the support on, especially on measures implementation, funding, and evaluation afterwards. And similarly as with citizens, also to share ownership and responsibility of the plan, because by the end of the day, it's not particular man, John, or I don't know, Kristina, who shares all the ownership of SUMP. It's a group of people who need to work on implementation. So this is a broad picture of citizens and stakeholders, different type of representatives on the other side. But before we go into some details of those, I would like to ask you whom you are engaging in your projects. And we have Mentimeter, which is arriving. The major, the major groups of society which we understand is crucial are local politicians, citizens, and public transport companies, which is already very good to see. Not that much, but some of you are connecting with neighboring cities, which is very good when it comes to concept of urban node. and quite a few responses on the rest of possible stakeholders. Okay, I think we got a picture of who you are working in your projects, and let's move then to theory on whom to work in your projects. So speaking again about whom to engage, it's very important not to forget, and we will come back in a few slides later on that, when to do that. But the reason I am articulating that and highlighting is that you cannot engage with totally everybody until the end of the project, right? So therefore, you also will see some hints on the formats. So of course, at the very beginning, if you want to approach as much as possible different citizens or stakeholders, you might not do particular mapping to understand what are the interests, what are possible influences out of all of them. So especially with citizens, you might quite likely would be engaging with all the groups that can be affected by some media measures or by, I don't know, website or I don't know, some announcements in neighborhoods and so on. However, it's very important that despite the type of engagement you choose, that you would cover as much as possible different groups of citizens. And when I say groups, I don't feel very right about grouping people when it comes to mobility. Maybe it would be more fair to group some vulnerabilities those people represent. And of course, it's very important also to reach out to remote and hard to reach groups of the people, because we have quite often we have most of the vulnerabilities. For example, I don't know, single moms, people living in remote areas, somebody working, I don't know, night shifts, which most likely are suffering of the consequences of mobility in the city, but we cannot even participate in the public meetings or some, I don't know, assemblies, because it's happening in, I don't know, after working hours when we just start working, or after working hours when we need to commute to the rural areas. So it's very important to think how to include those hard to reach groups of citizens. And also it's important not to forget and not ignore opposing groups of both citizens and also stakeholders. And when it comes to stakeholders, we will have some exercises how to understand which of the stakeholders are crucial to be engaged. And because, again, you cannot do with everybody the same focus group meetings or interdepartmental work, task forces, and so on. So when it comes to who, we need to do some segregation on both citizens and stakeholders. And I already started speaking about reaching the right people and those who represent the vulnerabilities of the city. There is this nice statement, I think it comes from Denmark or maybe somewhere else from Scandinavia, that if city is suitable for 8 years children and elderly people to travel, that means it's suitable for everyone. Because if you apply some measures which are needed as a right to mobility to, for example, people with disabilities, then most likely majority of people would benefit from that too. So it's very important to have representatives in your, I don't know, would it be panels, would it be some, I don't know, focus groups meetings, to have good representation of people, not only with disabilities and age-wise, but also, as I mentioned, those from rural community, people with low income. It's very important that mobility plan solutions is not raising and not creating transport poverty. It's also very important not to ignore and not to forget non-native speakers. For example, here in Lithuania and our neighboring countries, we have quite a lot of people from Ukraine and some other countries. You also have refugees from different countries or immigrants. So it's very important also to engage with those, so we understand what would be happening and we can reflect on that. And not to forget also marginalized communities. Everybody, despite religion, despite some different beliefs, vegan or LGBT community, they deserve to feel similarly safe and comfortable and secure in the mobility system. So when you do your reaching out to the people plan, you might think about those group whom to engage. When it comes to identifying stakeholders, I think it's very crucial to ask yourself quite a lot of questions, and I will show also good questions to provoke your thinking. But I think main question is what type of asset, at what stage, different stakeholder can bring to your project. So in theory, we could, when it comes to functionality and key assets, we could group those stakeholders in, I would say, 4 groups. So politicians, those people who have really competence on transportation, those people who can reflect how excellent technically is your plan. Those could be universities, professional chambers, sometimes even some NGOs specifying on very particular questions. For example, there are in London NGO on the blind pedestrian women. So that type of NGO can provide you knowledge you can quite likely not possible collect data similar as that. And the last group of stakeholders to think about, those who really can help you gaining public support. So it could be government bodies, but could be some entities like, I don't know, police or educational schools, for example, associations. Again, could be some NGOs who could be advocating your idea of SUMP. So this map of stakeholders is just first step to think to whom and why you should engage and also in what stages when you do your planning. And also what could help you with stakeholder analysis is to have a broader list of questions to understand what type of interest they have or we could have in your plan, but most importantly, not even in plan, but in outcome of your plan and in some consequences sustainable urban mobility plan would bring to the city. Also to understand what influence they can have on your plan and what type of, I don't know, incoming information is formulating the opinion and the influence we want to imply. And also it's very important, do they want something from you actually? If they are not interested, it will be very hard to engage, although you see that they are crucial for your, I don't know, outputs of SNP, for example. It could be if it's urban node and you have, I don't know, airport somewhere in 20 kilometers, you think it's very crucial to engage with them, but they might have some totally different questions on their agenda. So to analyze and to, so to say, to shortlist the list of stakeholders, those questions might be useful. And once you have the list of the stakeholders, I think it's very important, again, to try to map them. I don't feel very comfortable with saying prioritizing stakeholders in terms who is very much important and who is less important, but honestly, you cannot spend abnormal amount of time on engaging with people who are so not interested or so not needed to your project. And also formats could be very different. So idea here is to map quite clearly the most critical stakeholders groups who have high interest in your plan, but also have high influence. For example, mayor of the city, public transport company, I don't know, regional road authority who is giving funds and so on. And then also similarly to identify those who are least priority group of stakeholders who nor we have interest nor have influence on that, and those in between. So depending on the, so to say, status of the stakeholder, you can choose effective tools and formats how to engage with them. But then there is another question, when to do that. And I just want to remind you that there are 4 different phases in SUMP. And one of the crucial phase is implementation and monitoring. basically starting engage at this stage is like literally too late. So you need, ideally, you prepare your communication action plan and engagement advocacy plan already before you start preparing SUMP. And in this plan, you address the stages or sub-stages and the mini goals with whom and why to engage in different phase. So for example, in phase 1, you might need to engage with stakeholders and citizens, only with those who can provide you useful data or some information you cannot get from the data. On phase 2 and 3, when you need to do scenarios and to define final vision, you most likely would be engaging with people who are ready and interested to co-create with you. While when it comes to particular measures, pilots, and funding sources and robust implementation plans, you might need to engage with totally different group of stakeholders and also citizens to validate your ideas. But to summarize that, I think it's quite fair to say that input from citizens is the most crucial in preparation and analysis phase, because you basically are planning for the people. Sometimes they are quite knowledgeable in mobility or strategical planning. Quite often they are looking from very, very local perspective. So might be not that useful in developing overall strategy and I don't know, allocating funds, for example, for different measures. While stakeholders, vice versa, they are crucial in all the phases. They are really important, but the main idea with stakeholders is to gain the ownership and support to implement SUMP, not only to co-create very nice vision on paper or on dashboard, but actually to implement it. So I think my time is running out. So anyway, we will have another presentation disclosing different type of formats and how it could be done. I just want to highlight few quite common challenges. Most often, as I said at the very beginning, this engagement process is taken by SUMP team who is running the whole process in the municipality or some other institution. It's been taken as granted, so somehow we will engage, somehow we will do that. It's not that easy because, first of all, sometimes capacities are not there. And I must say, it's not enough to have, quarter of person throughout the process to carry all the engagement activities. And sometimes also not only capacities, but also skills are not there. So in majority of projects, I would have been working those who are, I don't know, which budgets are 500,000 or more or around that. We would dedicate quite a budget and I think mainly always hire some external help, external consultants, not to build the communication strategy, but to carry all the activities. Would it be very interesting social media? Would it be some, I don't know, applications, gamifications, high-level events, and so on? So having financial resources and external expertise would help you to carry the strategy. But the keyword here is to have that participation strategy. And there are quite a few bullet points, what not to forget when you build it. I will not go through it because at some point we will do a little bit of this engagement strategy later today, but also in a workshop we would be having. But this is just to have, when you receive your slides, to have in front of you the basic elements what engagement strategy should consist of. So this is it about this model, and to summarize the ideas, we thought that homework, which you could carry, would be the best thing to do. So when you will receive the slides today or tomorrow, you will find this link to the independent exercise. But also, if you would go to BSR Competence Center, you would find those exercises uploaded already now. So what we would like to invite you to do until next time we meet in a workshop in 2 weeks is to try to map your relevant stakeholders and also to discuss their role in SUMP process. So basically, you will find 2 tables, one to map to list the stakeholders and be able to map in terms of influence and interest who are those crucial ones to work with you. So if you do that, it will help you also to address some challenges we are preparing for you in the workshop. So this is it from me. If I took extra time, no worries, I will save it on my next presentations. So thank you for listening, and I give floor to you, Ira, back, right?
Yeah, thank you, Kristina. And if you have any questions to Kristina, you are welcome to post them through the Q&A box in the Zoom panel, and we can take them in the next stage of
And
Kristina's
if I
presentation.
if I can ask you, if you have questions and if you post them, could you indicate to whom is the question? Because the
Yes,
topic
of
today
course.
is quite generic, so just say
Yeah.
it's the Tim or Kristina or Beatričė, so it will help
Yes,
us.
of course, of course. And it's good reminder that please write if you're like dedicating the question to someone specific. So please write that there. Okay, but now it's time to move on in our agenda, and we have a very interesting presentation coming up from City of Leuven from Tim Asperges, who is a urban planner with expertise in urban mobility for more than 25 years. And since 2014, he has been working as an expert advisor on mobility for the City of Leuven, and he's also a guest professor at KU Leuven on urban planning and mobility policy. And today we will hear about citizen engagement and the Leuven approach. So over to you, Tim.
So good morning. I will give a presentation today about the real practice, what Kristina has explained in the first presentation, and the way we are engaging different stakeholders and also the citizens. That's one element.
Tim?
And the other element which is relevant is that I really will explain the delicate element, how politicians are deciding. And I really will show that the perception of the public opinion is vital in how politicians are deciding, and that we really have a bias in the silent minority and the silent majority and the loud minority. And also in Leuven, we do have experience with that element. But first of all, Leuven, it's a mid-sized city, a quite compact city. And we are more than 100,000 inhabitants, but also more than 50 to 60,000 students. So we are a real student city. We are also one of the mission cities with a climate city contract to become climate neutral. And that's really a red line in our approach. You will see it in my explanation. And when you see to the model split of Leuven, 20% walking, 37% cycling, 30% public transport, you could imagine my job is done. But what is important is when I zoom out, 9 in 10 commuters that come to Leuven use the car. So we do have huge accessibility problems and huge congestion problems. So we do have to focus on working mobility plans. And in Flanders, where Leuven is located, it's not obliged anymore to have a SUMP on the local level, but it is obliged to have a SUMP on the regional level. Just to give that information. Leuven is at the east part of Brussels in Flanders. So we are also in the slipstream of the Brussels capital. So we are in a very urbanized region. What I want to explain is the approach of Leuven in that citizen engagement and also engaging all the stakeholders in making decisions in mobility planning. First of all, I will focus on the working model of becoming climate neutral to Leuven 2030. And then I will give different examples of how citizens or civic participation is organized in city district plans in larger plans or in very concrete public design projects. And depending on type of project, we also follow another type of citizens engagement. First of all, so ambition is to become climate neutral. 15 years ago, we have founded an organization called Leuven 2030 for helping us becoming climate neutral. And why I say that, in that organization, we have 4 key stakeholders that become partner. It is the city of Leuven itself. It are companies from the city of Leuven. It are the research institutes, and it are citizens. And all of these 4 types of stakeholders can become a member if they also put in a commitment. I am going to do that kind of engagement to help the city of Leuven become climate neutral. And at this moment, the Leuven 2030 organization is consisting of around 700 members, going from small companies to big companies, the big research institutes and inhabitants. And all of them commit themselves to do actions that are put in some kind of roadmap to help the city of Leuven becoming climate neutral. And in that roadmap, there is also a main or an important chapter of sustainable mobility. So that is already a quite important cooperation model where professional stakeholders and citizens are put together in selecting the actions that need to be taken to become climate neutral and to have a sustainable mobility transition. It is also put in a climate sitting contract like Europe asked, and we are working together on that goal. That is the part of, let's say, the professional stakeholder connection. The other element is how then to involve the people that live in Leuven. And in that perspective, we also have different approaches. It can become from the citizens' request itself, that they take initiatives, which I will explain later. It can come from the city of Leuven, that the city asks involvement in preparing plans. And it is, of course, also a mix of both. And I can explain that at this moment, around 75 processes in doing a redesign of roads, going to a policy plan in urban planning, that are running in different processes of citizens' engagement. And that approach of how we are actively involving our citizens, you see it also in the score when we compare it to the different cities, the center cities of the Flemish region. You have here a map of the different, we have 13, let's say, mid-sized cities in the Flemish region. And the slide I show here is showing the trust people have in their city council. And you see that the city of Leuven, that is that green box. It is really a high score in how people trust the city council. And I mean it, it has all to do about how people are actively involved in different projects in Leuven. And as I explained in the beginning, it is not a single shot. There are different approaches. I give 3 examples in my presentation. The first one is the approach of people can do small suggestions in improving their neighborhood. It is called the Stand Up for Your Neighborhood program. Then I give an example of how the city council prepared their new contract of a new legislature, where they involved citizens in giving all kinds of ideas. And I end with explaining how we are working with citizens panels that are randomly selected to prepare mobility policy plans. But first of all, that Stand Up for Your Neighborhood program, it is already existing 20 years, and we have a menu where neighborhoods can choose different actions, or it is also possible for citizens to come with an own ID, and if that ID is approved by a jury, they can get up to 20,000 euro from the city to implement that ID. So it is really a bottom-up approach. Neighborhoods can come up with proposals, or neighborhoods can choose in a menu which we offer for them, like a box for books, a garden for grocery, street art in your neighborhood. So all kinds of small elements that can be selected by neighborhoods. And that is already existing for 20 years. And that approach is for us some kind of breeding ground that people are actively involved, and that we get them also involved in more complex policy plans. Second example is that one-shot, let's say, one-shot initiative in the beginning of a new city council legislature. The city council decided we are not going to make a plan on our own. We are going to organize a festival for all the citizens where they can give IDs. That was a one-day festival. And at the same time, there was an online panel or an online survey where people could give IDs. I would like that this new city council is realizing these kind of actions. So it was a create and participate, let's say, one-shot festival with a lot of information from the citizens. And I'm not going to explain it very briefly, but actually we got 2,200 proposals from the citizens, not only on mobility, but from these 2,200 proposals, 1,000 were mobility related. So you feel that traffic and mobility, people are busy with that topic. It is people really find it important. And what was vital in this approach is it was impossible to promise to all people we are going to realize the 2,200 IDs. From these 2,200 IDs, 1,300 have been put in the new city council approach. And what is vital in that is that we had to explain to all the people that sent IDs why we didn't take the other IDs. So you also have to explain to people why you are doing things, why you are not doing things, because otherwise you create some kind of frustration, which in the end will explode in your face as a politician. So it was an experiment which took also a lot of effort from the city administration, because also my department of mobility, we really had to answer all the people why we wouldn't implement some of their IDs. But it was also a good element. And then last example, it is then the policy plans, where we try to work with selected citizens panels. And when these citizens panels are selected, we really ask some kind of commitment of them to be involved in different working shops to get input from them. We did it at a redesign project of the harbor areas. We did it in a city district plan in Wijkmaal. And we did it also for preparing a mobility plan in one of our city districts, Kesselo. And what was the goal? So we wanted to prepare a plan, but that a group of mixed citizens got a very high impact in preparing the plan together with the city administration and the politicians. And it were 3 steps. We asked them First of all, also on a survey, on walking tours, to get ideas from everybody, and then to select some priorities. That were the first 2 steps. And that was then explained to the whole city district in an information moment. And based on that, an action plan would have been prepared and decided by the city council. So there are 3 steps, and in the first 2 steps, where we really asked a lot of commitment of that selected city panel, they came up with some kind 28 goals or ambitions that we proposed on a wider information market. And that was then after the second phase. And based on that information market and walking and talking with all of the people, the real action plan had been prepared and was decided by the city council. What was important in this approach is we asked a commitment of a group of people, quite high commitment, to prepare these 2 steps. And we had to avoid that based on one info market, where of course you have again citizens with a loud voice that have impact to the politicians, that on a one single shot info market, these ideas of that active working group were changed completely to avoid a lot of frustration with them. So that is more or less a balance that we had to safeguard. But in the end, in a process of, let's say, 1.5 years, we prepared then that SUMP of a city district together with a selected citizens panel. At the same time, in that city district, we offered a tool to count traffic. It is a sensor which has been developed in Leuven. We call it the telraam. It's a sensor that people put on their window. And what is this sensor doing? It is real-time counting traffic. And that was also an instrument that people were counting themselves. They can see it also online. It's open data. But it made the discussions with people more objective, because people always think in my street, it's the worst street of the whole world, based on that they really collected themselves information. We could have more objective discussions with them. So it was more or less given some instrument to objectivize the discussions, but at the same time, info market, discussion tables, and a selected citizens panel that already did a big preparation work. And last but not least, a very important plan, traffic plan, which had been implemented 10 years ago. It was a so-called traffic circulation plan of the city center of Leuven, where we did a very classical traffic circulation plan, which means that we doubled the pedestrian area in size, that we organized the traffic circulation that through car traffic was not possible anymore. And that was more a technical plan, which improved with expanding the pedestrian zone, the carless zone, implementing a cycle zone in our city center, where we did a consultation of people, but it was a plan that was prepared by the administration and asking to all stakeholders, can you improve it or fine-tune what we want to do? But what I want to say in this, so that this is more or less the technical plan that you prepare. But at the same time, when implementing that plan, we wanted to also upgrade the quality of the public domain. Because in the perception of people, when you do such quite radical traffic circulation plan, you take something from them and you have to give them something back, and that is upgrading of the public domain. And for that, I'm just skipping some slides here, because that are all the measures on shared mobility, on public transport that have been implemented in that plan. But for changing the quality of your public domain, we again relied on the power of the public opinion. And what do I mean by that? We had three types of tracks of upgrading our public domain. The bottom-up approach with small temporary changes. The co-creation approach, where the city administration was guiding groups of people to a redesign, and the real big city investments where we designed a plan and did a consultation with stakeholders. And I give some examples. This is an example of a bottom-up approach where schools around a square, together with inhabitants, asked this square in the city center, we would like to have a car-free square. It was not a question from the city council, it was a question from the schools. And they were supported in making some kind of temporary redesign of that square, because it is impossible for the city of doing a complete makeover everywhere on short term. But we helped them to give them some kind of material that has some robust time to be there for some years. And now it is really implemented like that. And in some years, it will get a complete makeover as a permanent redesign. The same, some other examples. Here, a spot in the city center where again, the neighborhood was involved in doing a temporary redesign. And working with this temporal redesign, it helps also to get support, because you can also explain in a neighborhood, if it is not working, we still can adapt it. So it helps, it is easier to implement in a step, first temporarily and then permanently, than doing it immediately permanently. Last example in that approach is we wanted to have more green in the city center, but it was impossible to do the redesign of the streets on short term. So we had to work with these concrete boxes that don't look nice. We organized workshops with neighborhoods, with schools, where they could, they could put that kind of design on these boxes. And it was a very successful approach in making it nicer, but also creating co-ownership of people involved in upgrading your public domain. We now have that in that program of Come Up for Your Neighborhood, that people are involved in putting that kind of street furniture based on design. And then last but not least, the big city investments, there the city council asked to us, we really want to have it in 2 years realized. So we did a design, a consultation, but also the implementation on short term to get really things changed based on that quite radical traffic circulation plan. This is an example of such strategic location. Also, again, here a square, which was a car square, which is now in the pedestrian zone. We did a design and we did a redesign.
I'm so sorry, Tim, to interrupt. I think we're a bit behind the schedule. So...
Yeah, okay. But I will skip this one, because this is now also the approach in doing redesign of streets, that we first prepare a temporary redesign, that people have the feeling, okay, if it's not working, we still can change it, and do then the permanent design. And just also in the wording, traffic circulation plan, it's already, people are going in the defense mode. But when you say we are going to do a redesign of public domain, that is more in a positive way to cooperate with people. I skip this example, but it's again the same approach in first the design temporarily furniture, and at the end, when it's working, a permanent redesign. I skip this one, and then I go to the last topic, which is really important. So how politicians are deciding, also in Leuven, but everywhere. I'm basing me now on scientific research that politicians care about public opinion. So they listen to the loud majority. And the silent minority and the silent majority is often not taken care of. And there are examples, for instance, in Brussels, the Good Move plan had been decided by City Council, but because of reactions of very aggressive small groups, they changed the plans again. And in this research, we know that that politicians are directly influenced in direct contact with citizens. They listen to citizens, and based on that, they take decisions. So it is important to realize that politicians often have the impression that a majority wants something to change, and at the same time, it is not a majority. And I have also an example here in Leuven. 75% of people are pro Zone 30. Despite there is a large majority that is pro, it was a political struggle to implement the Zone 30 because of that loud minority that had a lot of impact on making decisions. And I will skip the rest of my presentation, but what is important is that besides we are technicians that are preparing things, that are involving the different stakeholders, but in the end, we really need politicians that are able to lead the public opinion and not follow the public opinion, because they have the perception often that people want something else. And in that research, we speak about trustees that are politicians that have an own vision and that try to convince the public opinion based on their own vision. And you have delegates, they change their mind based on the perception of public opinion. And this is more a lesson in urban mobility, as this is a topic which is always very explosive. Maybe this is an explanation why changing things in mobility are so difficult, because politicians are influenced by this loud minority, and then in the approach which we do have in getting public involvement, we have to take care about that silent majority. That's more or less the story I wanted to tell. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's a really strong message to end with. And since we are a bit behind in the timetable and I see no questions in the Q&A box, I think we will move directly to Kristina's presentation. So over to you, Kristina, about selecting effective engagement activities.
Very inspired by Tim's presentation. So I think he already showcased a lot of successful activities for engagement. And if you see my slides now, I can run quickly through some elements which could inspire you also in your own communication action plan. So just before I go to different type of formats and situations, I want to again to remind two crucial things which are influencing activities you choose. So first of all, timing. And when I say timing, I do not mean spring or evening. I mean specific time of your timeline in the project, meaning that the stage. So you can have very, very different ideas what you want to achieve during engagement in the first phase, the second or third. Is it be co-creation of common vision, or is it to inform somebody about pilot happening? So depending on stage of the project and what you want to achieve, formats are arriving different, but also it's very important on the, how to say, status or prototype of stakeholder you want to engage. So this is the second pillar for choosing right formats and effective formats. And we prepared for you this table for inspiration. So you can see, and this list is could be going on and on and on with different type of modifications. But the main message from our side here is that would it be all the citizens, would it be stakeholders who are not really interested nor influencing too much your plan? Most likely you should be carrying the only idea to inform them and not to leave behind. So you would be choosing massive means for that. Social media, press releases, I don't know, TV air or radio air or some public presentations in dedicated or even different than mobility plan events. But the idea is to reach out as much as possible people and stakeholders who could get back to you as interested ones. And then you can already start thinking about different formats, how to work with those citizens, but also those stakeholders who are interested in your plan. And when it comes to stakeholders, those stakeholders who are interested very often cannot influence too much the dynamic of the plan and implementation. So those people are the most useful to consult, to get a feedback, to validate your primary idea, maybe to work again on technical excellence of I don't know, data analysis or first draft of vision or scenarios. But with interested participants, you choose the formats who are working for consultations. So basically to get feedback and to validate your ideas. And then out of that picture, you might identify very active citizens, but also very engaged stakeholders who are interested in your plan, who has some influence, or they are very influenced, but they are not yet so much interested. So with both those groups, you need to involve, really to involve, and through the surveys, through some participatory workshops, maybe with stakeholders creating some task forces or on specific challenges or on the overall process of SUMP. But basically, idea here is to find proper formats to keep active citizens on board so they can keep contributing or start contributing, and to involve as much as possible with important stakeholders. And the last column here is meant to discuss the formats with the citizens who can contribute. And I don't want to sound, I don't know, unpolite, but not all the citizens can bring equal knowledge and input to the plan you're doing, but some of them are really knowledgeable and enthusiastic and have a good, I don't know, good network among the other citizens. So you can think about formats, how to empower them to advise, to organize community-led project, to maybe to have a word or vote in budgeting. Would it be gender budgeting? Would it be general city budgeted? Would it be SUMP budgeting? Maybe they could be juries in some decision-making process. While with stakeholders, those formats of empowering are not really relevant. You should think about how to establish partnerships, how to agree on resource sharing, how to create decisions together, how to join the projects, and so on. So to summarize, I will go now very, very quickly through some of the examples from different stages towards citizens or stakeholders. But to summarize, depending on what you want to achieve, and depending, of course, on your capacities and the type of citizens or stakeholders you are addressing, you choose proper methods how to do that. And here are some examples. For example, our recent project was in a very, very huge metropolitan city. Nevertheless, the idea of engagement was the same. So just to show the same idea to inform and consult to get a little bit feedback. And for citizens, we had huge visibility events during European Mobility Weeks and later huge citizen information meetings with some target groups like students or pupils. We would have some awareness raising and training events, also some hackathons. So all those formats would be not only informing them about SUMP and the vision, but also consulting and getting some feedback step by step without those people even realizing that we are providing you some hints on the daily mobility life. While with stakeholders, we couldn't get the same formats working. So we had quite official project steering committee meetings. We had task forces, for example, on modeling. We had an interdepartmental working group, I don't know, for example, to inform about our forecasts on population and working places and to get information from them so we can build our mobility measures. So the same goal to inform and consult, but with different type of groups of society, we had different formats. There are some also examples from, this is one from Sweden, not only informing about possibility to use electric cars and car sharing, but also mapping some challenges and some ideas from citizens was implemented in Karlskrona. We have an example from Vilnius. We on the left with those red pillars, we see example of gamification. We created online game which helped us not only to collect data about how people are traveling to a very particular place in the old city, but also to do a little bit of awareness raising, kind of a little bit judging. So why do you go there by car? What would happen if you do not have where to park it? And then also to provide them with some alternative solutions, but also doing a little bit of anthropologist survey to see how we make the decisions if we provide them a lot of risks, which would be coming on the way with a car. So this engagement with digital tools we held during COVID because we didn't have any other chance. And so this is also was informing, but at the same time consulting. Different events on testing, for example, autonomous buses or some I don't know, cargo bikes or electric buses could be also used in terms of not only introduce the particular measure, but inform about higher goals and also to collect ideas from citizens and stakeholders sometimes on that as well. When it comes to pure consultation, I have two quite similar examples, one from Brussels, but after Leuven presentation makes not that much sense to keep highlighting our good examples from Belgium, but Brussels, by the way, was awarded as SUMP, received SUMP recognition because of basically communication and engagement plan. And although in one of 19 communes, they had even protest because this commune was approached during, again, COVID, and they misunderstood idea of some restrictions like low emission zones or some, I don't know, timing. They still managed to co-create together and to consult people on different type of scenarios. Similar example from very small town in one of the Greek islands where people basically were giving some SWOT analysis about the island, which was basically touristic island, so has very, very different mobility patterns and very few residents. Still, residents were involved to collect the idea on how that small city could change and what are, I don't know, what are possibly accepted restrictions for citizens in order to keep that small town more sustainable, also not only for tourists but for the citizens to sacrifice something a little bit. So those formats works with society who are interested, and you can consult this way. When it comes to stakeholders, basically this format is quite tricky. And most often stakeholders, they do not represent their private opinion, but they represent institutional opinion. So one of the, again, good examples from Brussels is to have an online survey with those who are interested to view some brief information on, for example, scenarios, and to find out, is it clear? Is it relevant to the I don't know, agenda of institution or department we were referring, and so on. So online survey and some panels could be also a tool to consult with stakeholders, but only with those who are really interested and motivated. None of the, I don't know, ignorant politicians or ignorant authorities would be screening in SharePoint your files and answering the survey. So you need to be quite clear to whom to approach with this approach. When it comes to involving and empowering citizens, for example, there is a good example for Barcelona, and not only for Barcelona and SUMP, but the variety of different projects. We have a platform where people can reflect, and they can see how time is left to reflect. We can debate, we can address the question to mayor on particular questions. So again, quite not personalized, quite generic, but powerful tool to people to reflect. But here we come to that risk, which Tim was already mentioning, that those type of formats most often they reflect this loud minority, and silent majority is keeping being silent. So again, think twice who and on what questions you want to reach, for example, through this platform. And with citizens on empowering with those who are really engaged, you can have different workshops. Again, this is examples from one of our projects in Vilnius, where people could allocate the places where we would agree that parking spaces would be removed, and they even tried what could be done in those spots. For example, I don't know, some little workshop for planting, I don't know, flowers, or I think we even had somebody selling bagels in one of the parking spots, so people could see that the space could be reused in different for different ideas, not only for parking places, and that helped to convince them to voting. You see also this huge box on the bottom of the slide that convinced them for voting, that they would agree that some of the parking places would be removed, not temporarily, but for all the time from that street. So it's already empowering people to imply some decisions. We have a good example was also from Tartu, where people that we also have in some other countries as well, in the cities, with different neighborhood programs where people can select the projects they want to be financed, and sometimes they contribute with, for example, in Vilnius, 50% of the budget. Sometimes they get financed, as also it was shown in Leuven example, and in Tartu, you can vote for idea which is implemented with investment from the city side. So it also empowers people, citizens, to believe that their vote matter and that they can influence the future. And with stakeholders, collaboration could be in different formats, but basically stakeholder workshops, task forces, joint meetings for particular challenges are quite the most effective ways proved so far to be done. And last thing, just before I close this presentation, I give floor to Beatričė, is for you guys to bear some challenges which would occur during the engagement process. So you already got used to political objections and changing passions and so on, but quite a new trend which is coming is those different risks and how to say image of contestation between different society groups, which is presented by artificial intelligence, or those so-called bots and farms of the bots in the social media. So this is something for you again to bear in mind, that that negative feedback you might be receiving definitely not should be taken as representative opinion of the society. And also lobby groups could be really abusing this engagement process if you do not manage wisely them. And but also some protest might arrive with those lobbying groups or those sometimes you really have negative and angry people, but normally if somebody is protesting against the ideas you are carrying, you should treat them as your dear children with empathy and trying to understand why we are against that. If we see something scary in the prose you are presenting, that means that most likely we really believe that something bad is about to happen. So you have to be very patient, transparent, and quite flexible to listen and to be open, considering mitigation of your solutions and modifications on what you can hear in different protests or I don't know, some negative messages you would be receiving. While when it comes to lobbying, we had also this, when we were preparing Vilnius SUMP, we had this situation with metro lobbyists, like really, really strong activists. And I realized that keeping saying that we do not need metro and Vilnius is too small, it doesn't work because you cannot be, you cannot be God in your local place. So after all, we decided to hold the international conference, and we invited 5 international experts from similar size to Vilnius cities to explain how we are doing public transport system in their cities without metro. And on the second day, I also hold a technical workshop and invited those metro lobbyists. Let's work on that critical mass of passengers, how we get those to the public transport. And if we reach that bare minimum of the passengers needed for metro to operate, then we discuss it in scenario. And of course, with that size of the city and that modal split for public transportation, we couldn't reach that numbers. And that idea was very politely, very, I would say, intelligently was held, I would say, until the next decades. So those were examples. And just before you go to Beatričė, we put also some important tips for you in the slides. You can read them when you find your copy of presentation in your email box. I just wanted to invite you also to do, based on examples from Tim and Beatričė, which are coming, and from some theoretical tips I would be providing, try to do your own engagement strategy. From the first exercise, you already listed and mapped your stakeholders. Now try to think about each important stakeholder, what you want to get from him or her or institution, and then based on that to think which is the phase or step of SUMP you need to approach that institution and what possible engagement format you need to choose for that. So that would be it from my side. And yeah, thank you for listening. And ladies,
Thank you so much, Kristina. I hope this gave many things to think about for everyone on like what engagement methods to use, when and why. So we will now move on to our last but not least speaker. So we will hear a bit more from Vilnius, and we have Beatričė Umbrasaitė, who has background in participation, social innovation, and placemaking, and in her current position as an advisor to the chief architect at Vilnius City Municipality, she focuses on fostering a strong culture of participation and dialogue among the citizens and other stakeholders. And today she will share us her experiences on delivering a very specific case, the very first citizens' assembly in Vilnius, focusing on the topic of sustainable mobility. So over to you, Beatričė.
Thank you for such a nice introduction, and thank you to Kristina and Tim for their presentations. Were both very interesting and inspiring for me to see. It's always nice to be in the circle of other engagement professionals and enthusiasts, as it's not always the case maybe where we work every day. So today I want to share a bit about Vilnius Citizens Assembly, which we ran last year. And as was mentioned, it was on the topic of sustainable mobility. I should have added a slide on where Vilnius is, but yeah, we are Vilnius, capital of Lithuania. We are one of the Baltic states, and our border is close to Belarus, but we border on the other side of the country, Baltic Sea as well. So this is where we are. Yeah, so what is a citizens' assembly? For those of you who may have never heard of such format before, it's quite a fixed way to engage citizens in a topic. And the way we did it, we followed quite strict rules from OECD of how they define assemblies and what it entails. But to sum up, it's a population that is formed by lottery according to demographic criteria, which in its composition reflects society, and they meet for at least 5 days to discuss a certain topic. In the beginning, they have to get acquainted to the topic, so there has to be a learning phase. Then there has to be a deliberation phase. Not a discussion. Maybe I put here discuss, but the discussion has to turn into deliberation where citizens weigh different trade-offs of the question that they've been given, and they need to come to a consensus, which is then later summed up in their recommendations that they vote on. So, and then the recommendations are given to the initiator of the assembly. In our case, it was a municipality and the mayor. Why are citizens' assemblies held? So they're popping out everywhere across Europe since 2013 or 14, maybe, with one of the first ones happening in Ireland. So assemblies have been seen to help make quality decisions and include public insights into policymaking. They also provide a social mandate for politicians to make difficult decisions, because the process in itself, it gathers varied groups and it helps them go through the process of, as I mentioned, weighing different options and then come up with some consensus and then give it back to the policymakers and decision makers. In its process, it does, if it succeeds, it should increase trust in public institutions, makes government more inclusive, strengthens social cohesion, and helps ensure there's a mistake here, not to ensure a path to corruption, but to close maybe or disrupt or fight. Because in that room, you may meet people you would never have other chance to meet in your life, and you meet for a significant amount of time. You make relationships with these people, and you feel that your time is really valuably spent, because together you solve city questions, you learn from experts, you may give yourself public speeches on what you discussed with groups. So it's a really bonding and valuable time that participants themselves say they have in the assemblies. And then it reduces polarization and disinformation, because through learning about others' experiences, there's also there's a way to build empathy between different groups that may normally be in conflict. So why did we do the assembly? We see the rise of assemblies in Baltic states. The first Tallinn assembly was held in 2023, and the first Riga assembly was held in 2024. And it happened, not planned, but so it happened that the next 2025, it was Vilnius first assembly. So each Baltic state capital had their assemblies year after year. We also won a call by an organization called Democracy Next for the cities to hold their first assembly. And by winning that, we got their consultations, their know-how on assembly organization, and 20,000 euro support that we could add to our assembly budget. Together with us, there were 2 other cities who won this call. It was Esch in Luxembourg and Karawan in Gambia, which is in Africa. how did we form the question of the assembly? So the assembly question needs to matter to all of the stakeholders, major stakeholders, so citizens, local political leaders, and city administration. For citizens, it has to matter because when they get the invitation, they need to feel the urge to participate, to solve it. For local political leaders, it still need to be in their mandate to solve or in their politics strategic agenda, what they want to do with the city in their time. And then for the city administration as well, it has to be in their mandate of what they can solve and what they can do with the powers they have in the city. So you have to find that middle spot where everyone could do something about the question. And our assembly question was how to ensure that Vilnius residents choose public transport, walk, or cycle more often, regardless of where they live in the city. So we wanted to discuss with the citizens how we can engage people to walk, cycle, or use public transport more, no matter where you live. And whenever I would present the assembly, before the assembly started, and I would present the question, straight away people would start giving me solutions, suggestions. Maybe they would share where public transport is not coming to their neighborhood. And it really felt that there is time to speak about it because many people have many opinions. So it really felt that the question is really hot and people will have a lot to say about it. But there were other reasons why we needed to do it. So the first, maybe one of those, is the fact that greenhouse emissions from transport is one of the largest part of total emissions in the city. Then we have our sustainable mobility plan accepted in 2018 or 16, because I don't know, you can maybe fix me. Is it 16 or 18 that you?
We did a household survey in 2017.
But when was the plan accepted? Sustainable mobility plan.
18. It was approved 18.
So Vilnius Sustainable Mobility Plan is from 2018 to 2030. So we have 5 years left to reach our goals. And here you can see the modal split, and the dark gray color shows our goal, and the green-blue color shows where we were in 2024. And 2017, where we were in the beginning. So you see that the cars in the city are actually rising, and we are getting further from the goal to reduce the number of cars in the city. We also have issues with walking, so people walk less in the city. There is a rise in the use of public transport and in cycling, but still it doesn't help to curb the growth of cars and increase pedestrians in the city. So there were some things we really needed to discuss because we have the strategy, it's not working. So we turned to citizens to see maybe where the issues are that we're missing, or where are these pain points that we could maybe do better. Also, what we feel as we work with the city where we have street redevelopments or public square redevelopments, the question about cars and their role in the city is always the most heated. And whether it would be even a new building being built or a territorial planning document being prepared, there's always a question about cars and parking and where they're going to stand and how much of the space we need for it. So it also felt that it's a values question as well, and we have so many opinions and they're all conflicting, and there's no one real way or direction that we as a city have agreed upon. So another issue why we needed to talk about it is that here you see the building permits that were released in 2024, and the orange dots are for single house buildings, and you can see that most of Vilnius is now being built on its outskirts, and we really have this urban sprawl problem, which even more increases the city's dependency on cars. So we can, based on this, we can project that even in the future, we will have this issue of more and more cars coming in the city and out. So we started the assembly, we agreed on the question, and we gathered an advisory board, which is one of the recommendations of OECD how to do assemblies. So as a municipality, we posed the question, we had the funds, but we were not the ones to sort of decide on what citizens need to learn about the topic, or we were not the only ones to do it. So we had to consult with various experts from private sector, from national government, from universities, on what we should tell the citizens about the subject and how this learning phase should be constructed. And we created this information booklet for participants, which we launched in Lithuanian and in English, because our group of participants were also language nationality varied. So on this by scanning this barcode, you can actually go to the English version of information booklet and see how it came about. After we kind of started preparing the information, parallelly, we started the selection process, and the selection process of assembly participants is also pretty strict. So we did what is called a sortition. We create a representative group by lottery. So first we sent out 13,000 letters by post mail in all of the neighborhoods of Vilnius based on their population. The number was distributed. And the addresses were selected randomly on which addresses get the letter. And in that letter was mayor's invitation to take part in this assembly. There was explained which dates it will be, and how to register. You could register by calling municipality or by filling out online form. So we got 731 registrations, and then we used the panel algorithm, which is created by MIT mathematicians. And we put 6 criteria, socio-demographic criteria, on how we want this group to look like, and it selected us of 54 participants that became the ones invited to take part in the assembly. So I will get a bit more in this because it's really important part of citizen assemblies. This is how the letter looked like. You can see our mayor's picture, his letter, and then all of the following information. During the time these letters were sent out, we did a communication campaign asking people to check their post boxes, because maybe not many of us these days do it. We check our inbox, but maybe not our post box. So the communication was all about this. Are you one of those people who got the letter? We tried to somehow engage people and make them check the boxes. So yeah, we got 731 registrations, which was pretty good. It was 5.6% of all of those letters sent out, and compared to other assemblies happening in Europe, it's a good number. And then we chose, as I mentioned, through this algorithm, final participants through 6 criteria. Through gender, age, nationality, education, neighborhood where they live, and the means of transport that they choose for daily commute. And those criteria, the quota of how many male and female we need, or age brackets which we need, were based on how the city looks today in those criteria. So here you can see how the assembly participants looked on the left side of the screen, and on the right side how the Vilnius population data looked on 2025 when we did the assembly, or when we did the sortition. So I've bolded the majorities, and you will see that some percentages differ, but the amounts of certain age brackets or gender or nationalities are the same as in the city. And the idea was to create this micro Vilnius in their variety. As you see, we selected 54 participants through algorithm. Then we called each of these people to say, congratulations, you were selected. And then from these calls, 43 agreed to come. And from 43 people that agreed to come, 39 actually participated in at least one of the meetings. So there's some dropout each time, which also, if you consider doing an assembly, would be good to think in advance to have more people selected than we did a bit. Then there's a neighborhood distribution on which neighborhoods or population-wise, and how the assembly participants, which neighborhoods represented. Then there's education level, and the final one, I didn't translate this one, is the mobility. So which mode of transport you choose for daily commute. And in our group, so we had, according to our model, split around 50% of Vilnius residents choose car for commute. So in our group, 51% of participants chose a car for their daily commute. And it was really important for us to have the same group of people so that our recommendations that the group comes up with have a sort of bigger value or bigger stance and social mandate to make the decisions based on what group comes up with. So it would win against the argument that those people who use cars were not sort of invited or not involved. So we really wanted to make this the same as the city split. How long did the assembly take? It took 5 days and one opening event and one closing event. So it all happened on Saturdays from September to December, 5 Saturdays, taking 1 or 2 weeks in between. First 2 sessions, there was a learning phase in light color here marked, and you can see how many different specialists we had sharing from different perspectives. We also had community organizers share. We had a person with disabilities share on his experience in the city. And on the second session, we also had participants go from Vilnius city center to one of the outskirts of Vilnius with a train to experience a more sustainable ways of travel for the city. And then 3rd, 4th, and 5th session were all by facilitators made to help people come to final recommendations and vote of them. And the closing event was more of official celebration and the handover of the document to the deputy mayor. So here's the opening event we had on September 24th. It was just one evening, and we can see the deputy mayor and our mobility company director making welcoming speeches. Then on September 27th, we had the learning stage where various experts gave their presentations, and it was formed in a way that citizens were walking from one, like a conference, small conference in the whole municipality building, from one room to the other, and then they later shared in groups on what they learned. Then another learning stage, as I mentioned, we traveled with a train once, to change locations, more presentations, more talking in groups, and already synthesizing what we heard, what we think about it, and what comes up. And then from October 18th, we started working more in groups and really coming up with those first proposals. I will also shortly mention that here on the right, you can see a translator. She's covering her head with a notepad. So we had two translators all the time because we had 2 participants who were not speaking Lithuanian because they represented other ethnic minorities of the city. Forming recommendations, as you see in these pictures, we had various formats of deliberation, full rooms, standing, talking next to a wall, all sitting in smaller groups discussing, but then opening again discussion to the whole group. So really facilitators made a great job to make sure that everyone has a chance to speak, that we raise questions in various sizes, and we keep synthesizing and coming up and keep coming to concrete recommendations. What we also did in one of the breaks between the sessions, we had a feedback group. So we gathered various specialists from municipality working with mobility, and they looked at the draft recommendations, and we discussed each recommendation, and then later they presented this draft back to participants. It was not to say this recommendation is good or this recommendation is bad, but to more help bring municipalities experience in them. So maybe in some of them we were already some plans. Maybe some of them were really long term and could happen 10 or 20 years time. So we tried to bring municipality perspective in these and then present it to the participants. Participants heard that, kept working on recommendations, and we ended with the voting. Voting was taken by phone, and we could see results on screen for each recommendation live. After the assembly, I just put one slide. It's in Lithuanian, but this is how the report looks. So we have 24 recommendations. On the left side, there is a recommendation, and on the right side, we wrote who is responsible for this recommendation and what is the decision on the recommendation. So I think out of all 24 recommendations, you could say that all of these recommendations were to support the sustainable mobility plan. Not one of them was to support the car dependency in the city. So it really took some drastic recommendations, for example, like to really open up and widen the low emission zone in the city center, or to introduce new public transport method in Vilnius, which will take time, but it really showed, I think, for the politicians that the direction that the citizens are taking is way more brave than I think many of us think. Lessons learned, I will speak maybe now from organizers' perspective, because my job was to really make everything happen. So if you do an assembly, just keep going. There will always be so many questions that you will not have your answers to. You will not be sure. You will be always in the unknown, and you will always come up with barriers on people saying that it's not possible. It's just always this mindset that you have to keep going, and when everything happens, you really see that everything is possible. Another lesson that municipality can do it. So it was really just opening new doors and to new people for myself in the administration who were open for it. And I think really my colleagues, even I felt some support, that they felt that this is something different. This is something that we never done before, but there's something in it, in giving this power to the citizens to gather and to deliver it. Then have volunteers. We had 11 volunteers, various years brackets from 18 to I think 60 years old, and all of them were our biggest supporters, ambassadors, and they helped us a lot. Then seek advice and help from those who already done it. As I mentioned, we had a lot of help from Democracy Next, and they network and have connections to assembly organizers from around the world. And any question we had, we could straight go to them and have answers and support. So this is really helpful. If you can have at least, or find other city who done the assemblies, and you can at least share and have this advice. Have a team. I had a great team. Without them, this would not have happened. Select double number of participants than you expect to have. So we expected to have an assembly of 50 people. We selected 55 and we had an assembly of 39. So there's really quite a big number that drops out from the people that may have registered in the beginning, but then something changed, which is all normal. And what maybe I want to end with is that even though at the moment we are still, I guess, trying to make sure that this first assembly recommendations happen, and we not have maybe plans to do an assembly next year, but the assembly effect has really left a mark in how we work. It showed us, it opened us new doors. So for example, at the moment we are running this participatory planning of and vision creation of wooden district next to actually municipality building, which is wooden historic district. And we invited locals, people who live there, then people who have investment there, so developers, and his heritage specialists, and us. We all work in groups on creating this vision, and we started from sending out letters to exact this neighborhood, people who live there, to the post box with an invitation to come and to participate in this process. And before the assembly, we would not have been able to do this, because to do this for the assembly, we had to change our data laws and some other contracts with registry center, and we did that. And now we have a new opportunity to send out letters to people just to invite them to participatory processes. We also learned that mixing of different stakeholders also can help, and you have to have a varied group to make sure that all of the perspectives are being heard and considered in the room. So yeah, I think even though maybe a new assembly is not planned today, but it really made our other participatory processes better. So this is a picture of all the assembly members and organizers and facilitators and some of the volunteers. And yeah, thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Beatričė, for sharing the tips and lessons learned from your experiences. And it's a big effort, but it can make a great impact. So thank you for this. Thank you also for all our other speakers today, Tim, Kristina. And before we end the webinar, I'd like to say a few words about the one and last workshop that we have in this SUMP training program. It's quite sad, but it's coming towards the end. We will have the last workshop, so we will practically work on practicing, like preparing a advocacy plan. So join us for the workshop on in 2 weeks on Wednesday, 27th of May, starting at 9. And I also shared you a link to the chat to our final conference. So you are very welcome to join us in Gdynia to hear more about the SUMP program topics. So with these words, I would like to thank everyone who has participated and all our speakers, and you're most welcome to join the workshop. And thank you for today, and have a great day.